And so it's that personal connection, I suppose, for people, and they're just so happy when they finally see these things back in their home, you know, running nicely like they used to. My name's Malcolm, and I'm a retired engineer, and I developed an interest in clocks about 10 years ago after my father and mother passed away. Dad started collecting clocks. He had lots of interests, but he started collecting clocks when I was about 20. After he passed away, his clocks were distributed through our family, and I ended up with a few of them. And then I started to collect my own from old wares shops and things that were probably otherwise going to end up in the bin. And I sort of thought, well, maybe I can start to rescue some of these things. So as an engineer, I think they're wonderful on two counts. One is that their design is just amazing. To get something like these doing what it does in like the 1880s, and in this case, the late 1700s, so this is like 1770, from a design perspective is amazing. And then there's the construction. So how they actually made these things with no electricity and all the rest of it is just, I just find that quite amazing as in human achievement. I think they're wonderful things. So this is actually my dad's toolkit. They're just very small tools. So no different to working on a car, but it's on a small scale. It's a mechanical device. So there's small screwdrivers, small pliers, there's little oiling pins and things to use. You dip them in these Swiss oils and spot them where they need to go. So it's not a lot, but they're very small, accurate tools. You know, there's two main types of clocks. I mean, this guy here, it's a Vienna regulator, it's German, and it's a weight-driven clock. Whereas these guys here, these are spring-driven. A spring is just a piece of spring steel. It's flat, probably about 1.5 meters long. But a spring, you basically wind this flat up until it's just a little coil, and that's what you see in the clock. So weight-driven and spring-driven, they're the two main sort of drives. They're fundamentally different to work on. So weight-driven clock will be very accurate because the torque provided to the movement is constant from the time you wind it up to the time it drops. So there's no variation. Whereas a spring-driven clock will run fast when it's wound up and it'll go slower when it runs down. You know, this thing will run fast when it's wound up and go slow, like by about 10 minutes variation over the week. It's an 8-day movement, so over that week it'll vary by 10 minutes. I sometimes tell people they're like an approximation of time. To resolve that between the English and the French, they developed a thing called a Fusee, which is a drum that goes between the spring and the movement, and it's a tapered drum. So it compensates for the variation in spring force and provides a constant torque into the mechanism, even though it's a spring-driven clock. So a Fusee mechanism, they are more expensive in the more expensive clocks. Sometimes they're just on the time train. Sometimes they're both on the time and the strike train. And it's just to compensate for this drop in force over the, as the spring winds down. A spring-driven clock, there's this term called overwinding that people use very loosely. So when you wind it, it'll wind all the way, and you can wind it until it's completely tight, and you can't wind it any further. So in that sense, you can't overwind it. But in the clock world, in horological terminology, overwinding is just winding it to that point where it's so wound up tight that it won't actually even release. Because these older springs, if there's a bit of gum on them, they're a bit mucky, there's a bit of corrosion here and there, it doesn't take much. You've got that huge length of surface area bound up into a ball, into a spiral, and if you wind it up that tight, it won't release, and that's what we call overwinding. So it's a terminology thing. It primarily, well, there's some adjustments to do. It hadn't been serviced, this thing, or it had nothing done to it for 55 years, but was still running. And that is a testament to the design and construction of some of these things, because the way it's been built, it's an English Smith Enfield clock, probably only about 1940s, it's a grandfather, so it's a relatively young clock. And you can see the length of the pendulum is, it's almost touching the floor there, and I've actually had to pack this up more than I usually do. But I actually go to the person's house, take the movement out, and the weights and the pendulum, and bring them home here and set them up like this. I don't need the case, obviously, and it's just far too big to move anyway. There's no need for it, so I bring the movement home and set it up on the bench. I take the hands off, take the dial off, take the weights off, all the rest of it, and I wash that movement out. So it's been washed and oiled, and it's ready to go home. I can actually show you how it strikes. I'll just trigger it. So this is the 3/4 hour. So these are the hammers. I've still got to adjust the hammers, but I won't do that until I get the clock back into its case. And this is 11 o'clock, so if you watch what happens here. I'll trigger that. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it'll strike. So there was adjustments to do, thorough cleaning and oiling, very dry. It's amazing that it was actually still going. You know, our family's been heavily involved in yachting and sailing. My father was very interested in astronomy, and so am I as a result, and I'm interested in the clocks. And it's a fascinating thing that the three sciences combine in a very unique way. In the early days of maritime voyages in ships, like prior to 1700, using a sextant and celestial observations of the sun with a sextant, you could always find latitude. You knew where you were that way on the Earth. But there was no way of determining longitude, which is where you are that way. And there was many ships wrecked because of it. And it got so bad, there were so many lives lost, and the ships and the cargo and the whole bit, that the English Parliament actually offered a reward for a solution to what's known as the Longitude Problem, like where you are that way on the Earth. Offered a reward of £20,000 back in 1714, which in today's dollars is about £3 million, which in Australia is about $6 million. Like, that's how serious they were to try and sort this out. It needed to, there was some requirements, so obviously it needed to survive or be accurate and be able to run in rough seas. And John Harrison developed a balance wheel spring arrangement which was not subject to movement. And in his entire career of about 50 years, he only developed 5 clocks. He got these things from this animal-looking thing down to what looks like a modern-day overgrown watch, almost. He won this prize eventually. That's actually a French carriage clock, so this is like 1880. It's got a balance spring you can see it in the top there. You know, you can move these around, do whatever you want. And that's why they're called carriage clocks. But that's based on Harrison's balance spring arrangement. So Thomas Mercer started in 1858 making chronometers based on John Harrison's balance wheel arrangement, which is what I showed you here in this French clock. Highly accurate. So that's locked. They're gimbaled, obviously. You can gimbal them one way, like that, or both ways. So you can do whatever you want with this thing. You chuck it in your car, go out to sea, it's fully gimbaled. To wind them up, there's a key there. You actually have to open a little opening there. This keeps all the dust and moisture out of it. You can't overwind this, it comes to a physical stop. I'll show you. See there? It's actually stopped. I can't wind it any further. There's a mechanical stop there to stop you winding the spring up so tight that it won't release. This is what sailors would rely on prior to GPS. Very high quality. I mentioned before the Fusee wheel. That is the Fusee wheel. So whilst it's spring driven, the spring's in this drum here. In this case, it's encased in a drum, not open like that other one I showed you. Again, for cleanliness. The spring will be providing a greater torque into the movement when it's wound up, and it drops off as it unwinds. So that's the Fusee drum that compensates for that. So when it's fully wound, it's driving off the small side of the drum, and as it winds down, it comes out to wind off the larger side of the drum, so providing a constant torque into the mechanism. And that's a modern chronometer, if you like. So we've got John Harrison to thank for all of that, and saved a heck of a lot of lives at sea. So you could look at a chart, you find Greenwich, you've got a chronometer that tells you what time it was when you left, you know what time it is where you are, by celestial observations with a sextant and some tables. You can just straight away say, okay, we're here. And the shipwreck stopped. So on the personal front, I suppose, I find people often have clocks because they've been passed down through the family, and they have significant sentimental value, and they've been buried in a box somewhere for years and years, and I like that side of it, to be able to help people bring these things back to life. And in many cases, there's not a lot wrong, and they just need a good clean and then oiling. It's very satisfying. And so it's that personal connection, I suppose, for people, and they're just so happy when they finally see these things back in their home, you know, running nicely like they used to. And I take great care because I know in many cases, you know, you can't get parts for these things. So I'm very careful. Something I just, I know that I've got to just take my time, pardon the pun.